Alrighty, CNT120, Chapter 3, we are looking at MAC addresses now. Our data link layer address, our MAC address. So remember, this is the address burned into your network card. It's a 48-bit number, but written as 6 hexadecimal numbers. If I take a look here, this is a 2-digit hex number, colon, 2-digit hex number, colon, and so forth. Those 6 hex numbers are 8 bits each. So 6 times 8 is your 48 bits. So if I were to convert all this to binary, I would have a 48-bit number. This is used on a LAN to find each other, the nodes in LAN to find each other. So we're talking basically devices in a switch. So those devices in a switch, think about in a lab room or an office building, an office, the floor of an office. Those computers can find each other with these MAC addresses. This is really kind of a local type of address. The switches, if you remember, are going to remember any traffic coming in out of a port. It's going to remember that MAC address and say, oh, okay, this MAC address is on this port. That way, as traffic comes in the switch, it says, oh, where are you going? Oh, that MAC address? Oh, that's on port 4 over here. I will send it out only port 4. Switches work at layer 2 and try to get the data to just one port by that MAC address. Remember, there's a lot of different names also for this MAC address. As I like to say, if you read a couple books or read a couple articles or hear a couple different people talk about networking, you'll end up hearing a bunch of these different names. So I try to put them all in one spot for you. It is a physical address because it is burnt into the network card. You're not going to change it. It is an adapter address because it is built into your network adapter. It is a layer 2 address because it's at layer 2 of the OSI model. It's also called a data link layer address because that's the name for layer 2 of the OSI model. And it's an Ethernet address because it is burnt into an Ethernet NIC because we're usually dealing with an Ethernet network. So therefore, it's usually an Ethernet address that we would be dealing with. If I look at some network cards and pull them out, I might actually see the MAC address printed on there. There's one that's actually designed for wireless. Here's a wired NIC. The MAC address is kind of branded on the side, but it is actually burnt into that hardware. Again, here's all those names. It is a 48-bit number written as 6 hex numbers like so. Those are the kind of the format of it. A traditional MAC address contains 2 parts. The first half, the first 24 bits, identifies who made it. So these first 24 bits, if I look at those hexadecimal numbers, I could find out that Intel made this NIC, or Linksys made this NIC, that kind of thing. That identifies the manufacturer. In our CNT lab room, we have 25 computers in there. I always like to say to people, if you pull up the MAC address on every one of those, the first 6 digits will be identical because all the computers are identical, made by the same manufacturer. The last 24 bits is unique then. That is unique for the NICs in the room, the MAC addresses in the room. Those last 6 digits will be unique. So that is unique to that PC, either that printer, that PC, that server, that IP phone. Any of these devices on the network would be unique to that. So that MAC address actually has 2 pieces to it. First half identifies who makes it. The last half is unique for that PC. And you can actually look it up. Here's a tool you can use to look it up to say who made this NIC. And let me see if I can get that guy to open for us. Oop, that's not what I want. I want to just open it up. There we go. And actually, it'll be hard to see in there. But if I scroll down through, let me slide this over. I'll slide this tab out. And then we'll... Come on, tab. And we'll slide it down this way a little bit. There we go. So I can actually put a MAC address in here and find out who made it. So let's do 2 things. I'm going to pull up my command prompt. Here's my command prompt. We'll do this a little bit later, but if I do an IP config on this guy, this will show me just the IP address. It does not show me anything specific about the network card. But if I do IP, let me do a clear screen here. Let me do ipconfig/all. This shows me all of my addressing information, including the MAC address. Well, the wired network card in my computer I'm not using right now. It's disconnected. However, that wired network card, here is the physical address for it. Here's the MAC address for it. So if I were to take this whole MAC address, let's see if we can do a Control-C here. I'm going to go back to this tab right here and paste it in. I could do find, and it should show me down here that this is the company that made that MAC address. Based on that, those first 6 digits right there, it lets me know who made it. Well, let me keep going on my command output. I'm going to keep scrolling because my laptop also has a wireless adapter in, just like yours does too. So here's my wireless adapter. There's its MAC address. You'll notice it's unique. Yeah, these 2 network adapters in here are unique. Each one has their own MAC address. So if I take this MAC address now, and let's try to plug it in the tool back here, and we'll see if that tells us anything different. Let's do a find on this guy. And we find Intel made the wireless NIC. So on my computer we have 2 different manufacturers. One made the wired, if you will, and one made the wireless. But it can tell that by looking at those first 6 digits. It's like, hey, those first 6 lets us know that Intel made that NIC. So you can actually look that up. Once upon a time when you had to really search for drivers, something like that was really handy to be able to figure out who made it, to know who you're searching for. And again, here is, I just showed you 2 MAC addresses on my laptop, but there will be a sample MAC address. Again, this is used to identify a specific node on a network, like a LAN. My PC in the lab room as opposed to your PC in the lab room. Again, the switches are going to read those MAC addresses as traffic moves in and out of that port. As traffic comes into a port, the switch goes, who sent that? And it's going to assume that that is the device attached there, and it keeps that in memory on the switch. And now, as traffic moves in and out of the switch, it's like, well, I know where that is. I'm going to send it only out that port. That's the idea behind that. And that's your layer 2 smarts on the switch. Now, I'll remind you this now, and remind you this again later. Our physical address is used by, this MAC address is used by switches to get data to the correct PC in that network. So think about all the PCs plugged into the switch in our lab room. That switch is there to get the data to the correct PC in the room. When I back out a step, and we'll talk about this when we talk IP addressing, IP addresses are used by routers, layer 3. IP addresses are used by routers, layer 3, to get data to the correct network. So the router is only really concerned at getting it to the York campus of Hack as opposed to the Gettysburg campus of Hack. So the router is going to read the IP address and get it to York as opposed to Gettysburg. Once it gets to York, into the York campus, if you will, the router and the IP address kind of like wash their hands, like, we're done, we're good. And now the switch at the York campus, if you will get it to the correct PC at that campus or that lab room, if you will. So those 2 addresses, kind of try to start keeping in mind now where they get used. IP address getting used by routers to get it to the correct network. Once it's in that network, the switch goes, I got it. I can read the MAC addresses. I know how to get it to the correct device on this network. So I just kind of put a reminder here which each one of those are getting used for. Again, here's a MAC address on a wireless card. If I do ifconfig at my MacBook or my Linux command prompt, ifconfig will let me see the actual Ethernet address. You see it's labeled there as Ethernet address. Okay, and on my Windows machine, if I do an ipconfig all like I was earlier, I'd be looking for that physical address. So even in these 2 systems, we see one labeled Ethernet, one labeled physical. So as I said before, I was trying to put all those names in one spot for you. Start recognizing all those as like synonyms, if you will. All different ways of saying MAC address. All right, there's the MAC address from our chapter.